Hello everyone, welcome back. I hope you all found your first group discussion very productive. I'm now going to turn things over to my PACE colleague Leah, and she's going to lead the panel.
Hi guys. Alright, hi guys. Hope your first session was good. We're going to go into the panel now. So I'm going to do this, I'm going to go over the format really quickly so we'll know what we're doing, and then I'm going to do some introductions. Sound good? So first and foremost, I'm going to do the intros in a second. Then we're going to do an open-ended question of our panelists, and then we're going to open up into Q&A. Sound good? Okay, so we have till 3:35 to do this. And let's get started. I'm going to do some intros. I'm going to start at the other end with Judge Diekhoff. The Honorable Mary Ellen Diekhoff was a deputy prosecutor for 16 years in Monroe County, Indiana. She received a doctorate of jurisprudence degree from the Indiana University School of Law in 1986. She currently occupies seat 4 of the 10th Circuit Court of Monroe County, presiding over Circuit 5, handling criminal cases. She also is an adjunct professor in the IU Department of Criminal Justice and at the Maurer School of Law. Judge Diekhoff is the presiding judge of the Monroe County Drug Treatment Court. We can do applause then. We're going to go down the line again with Brandon Drake. Mr. Drake is a board-certified drug and alcohol interventionalist, certified recovery coach, EFT practitioner, certified life coach, and the founder of Courage to Change, which is a sober housing collective for people who suffer from substance use disorder. Brandon has presented at national conferences, speaking on topics of mental health and substance use disorders, and the direct link to childhood trauma and adult trauma. His passion lies in community organizing, local and national advocacy, and in giving a voice to those who have been traditionally silenced in our world and in disenfranchised communities worldwide. Next is Kari Lawrence. Dr. Lawrence is an assistant research scientist at the IU School of Public Health, an associate director of the Rural Center for AIDS and STD Prevention, which stands for RECAP. She has over 16 years of experience working in child welfare, juvenile justice, and health education. As a researcher, she explores the influence of social and political factors on access to health care and related services among people who use drugs. At RECAP, she oversees an independent collaborative effort to initiate and support the development of community capacities to address harms associated with injection drug use through prevention programs. Next is Senator Jim Merritt. Senator Merritt was elected to represent Central Indiana in 1990. He serves as Majority Caucus Chair, Chair of the Senate Committee on Utilities, and Ranking Member of the Senate Committee on Commerce and Technology. He also serves as the member of the Senate Committees on Homeland Security and Transportation, Joint Rules, Public Policy, Rules and Legislative Procedure, and Veteran Affairs in the Military. He holds a bachelor's degree from Indiana University in Political Science. Senator Merritt has led efforts aimed at killing the opioid and heroin epidemic, in addition to helping those addicted, reducing underage drinking deaths, protecting law enforcement, and more. Can I get a round of applause for our panelists, please? Thank you all for being here. We really, really appreciate it. We're going to start off this conversation with a question. And if it's okay with you, I'm going to go down the line and go from there. The question is, what does the opioid crisis look like to you? What possible solutions do you see? And who is responsible for implementing them?
Give me a start.
Do you want to start, Senator Jim? Senator Merritt? Or do you want to start, Judge Diekhoff?
Can you hear? Okay.
Let's do it.
Is that on? Oh? Now you, all right, good. Great to be here. I spent 4 years here in the late 70s, and I hope you love IU as much as I do. The opioid crisis has really turned into the addiction crisis. We, several years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, I was on Ball State's campus, and it was actually 2012, and fall 2012, talking to kids about the students, young adults, the Lifeline law, and how if anyone's under 21, that they're in a social situation, they need to call or call 911. Now you can text 911 and make the call, and you have immunity. Well, an EMT was in the back of the room. He was all dressed up in his equipment, and he walked up to me and said, "Why aren't you talking about Narcan?" And I said, "Well, what is Narcan first?" And so he kind of educated me that it had been around since the 60s. They used to actually wake up babies, newborns, with it, and just a spritz in the nose, and it does its thing, and how it counteracts a heroin overdose. And it was a learning moment for me. So in the next 3 sessions of the legislature, we allowed it to be on emergency vehicles. We then allowed it by prescription. Then we allowed it over the counter. And after that, that last session, I felt as though we needed to push through and get to the epidemic and seeing what we could do to kill heroin in 5 years. I gave us 5 years. And we proceeded to understand what the tools we had at our hand, how many people we had working in the area of opioid epidemic of addiction to heroin. And we've done a really good job up until this last session when we passed a piece of legislation with Senate Bill 139 where Department of Health and the coroners are now working hand in hand on cause of death. And to me, if you're going to solve a problem, if you're going to accept a challenge, you have to actually understand what you're approaching. And now we know what is killing people in our state, whereas in Ohio they way ahead of us on that. Ohio got $110 million from the federal government last spring, and we got 35 because we weren't able to identify what is killing our people in our state. That sounds terrible, but it's actually true. And so this has been a long process for us, and I'll let everybody else talk about this, but the bottom line is where we are now is we're into an addiction era. We haven't killed heroin all the way, but there's been a massive pushback in the air in the balloon, if you will, has gone towards meth. And if you talk to anybody in the law enforcement area, meth is incredibly prevalent in every community. And the problem with meth is there's really no counteractive. It wears down your body, and it's a killer. And there's no Narcan to bring you back from a meth type of overdose. And now meth and fentanyl and opioid, some sort of opioid, heroin, are all being laced and put together into a cocktail because people can withstand a heroin overdose. But I'm happy we're going to be here a while. We can talk about the different methods, but right now I have a proposal in front of the legislature creating an addiction hospital that one would go in southern Indiana, one would go in central Indiana, one would go in northern Indiana. A detox, treatment, and recovery system of care. Whereas a lot of are just, you don't want to say shop, but one place for detox, one shop for recovery or treatment, and then one for the other, recovery. And so we need it all together so people can get better quicker.
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm Dr. Kari Lawrence. I'm a townie in Bloomington. I was born and raised here. I got all of my degrees here as well. But I have actually left Monroe County at one point. Lived in Kansas for a couple of years. But prior to going to school, I worked in a variety of child welfare and juvenile justice arenas, both here and a while in Kansas. So did a lot of work with families who were involved with the criminal justice system as a result of this brain disease, this health issue that's really complex. And so actually when I was in you know, that was actually a driver for me to go and get these advanced degrees, because I felt like I just couldn't, things for these issues are so complicated, and you have a lot of systems and as players trying to solve the problem, but sometimes because of what's going on with the individual, what's going on with the family, and how that impacts and kind of ripples out, there wasn't one answer. So one thing that I noticed, though, is that policy had a lot of influence on how someone had access to the resources that they needed or the families needed. So I wanted to understand how to work this policy arena, because I saw how that really impacted, in that time, people's ability to have access to health insurance and be working through the recovery process. So long story short, I had the ability when I worked to get my PhD here at IU to work with Elinor Ostrom, who won the Nobel Prize, to apply her Nobel work to health. And I think that has been driving the research I do, which is very community applied and very involved, and really taking some of these, both the policy problems as well as these social problems, and how do we collectively work to solve them, especially the more complex they are when you have multiple systems involved. So that has been kind of me as the academic. I think also at heart, I really have I've always had a passion for social justice, deliberative democracy, something I love as well, just getting people involved to come together and solve some of the local issues with leveraging the local resources that you have. I work a lot with community partners both here in Indiana, as well as now some of my work has expanded throughout the U.S. and globally, and unfortunately because of Scott County. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I think I will let these other fine people tell you who they are.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence.
I'm Brandon Drake. She was me earlier, but I was grateful for the way Jim opened up. Because one of the things I looked at, when this question was posed to me by Lisa through email, I thought, you know, we've talked about opioids over the last 3 or 4 years, but really, like I grew up in the 80s. I was born in 76, grew up in the 80s when the crack epidemic was around, and I was raised in a minority family. I was raised in a poorer community in Wilmington, over on the west side. And so my mother and dad were cooking crack in the kitchen while we were kids trying to figure out where we were going to eat. So this was always been here. And even in those days, I remember richer white people coming over and buying dope. It was always around, but what's happened is opioids are killing people so quick, and it's killing people at such a fast rate that we had no choice but to step up and start addressing this as an opioid crisis right now. But what we're really in is a social crisis and an addiction crisis. And what I always talk about that I believe caused it, and I talk from a data standpoint, from research that we've ignored since the 1990s. There's a long time in the 1990s. Dr. Folletti, he was a doctor in San Diego. He had an obesity clinic. This was actually discovered off of an obesity clinic. But he had an obesity clinic, and the women that he was seeing, it was reported that like 70–80% of them actually were reporting some form of childhood trauma. Now, when you talk about, we're in a trauma-phobic society. When doctors are trauma-phobic, most of our therapists up until recent times were like psychologists, psychiatrists, they weren't really talking about trauma. But he started doing studies with Kaiser Permanente because of those findings within his obesity clinic. And they did the first massive study, which pointed to that it was like 17,000 people across a sector out on the West Coast, all upper middle class. 70% of them were white. Most of them were college educated. And they did this study, and they found some fascinating results that all chronic illness goes back to some form of trauma as a child. And when we talk about trauma, people automatically go back to things like rape, things like sexual abuse or physical abuse, but that's not always trauma. Trauma is also where you feel like you're neglected at home, or you feel like if there's somebody there, that you're being yelled at all the time, or you're being bullied at school. So they did this massive study, and I'm getting to the question here. I'll get there. But they did this massive study, and they figured out that if someone answered 4 or more to these 10 questions, they were simple questions like, were you ever sexually abused? Were you ever physically abused? Did you feel neglected in the home? Were you yelled at a lot in the home? Did you have a parent that was jailed in the home? Did you have a parent that had a mental illness in the home? Did you have, and there's like 10 of them, right? If you answered 4 or more, you had a 400% chance to become an alcoholic over someone who had a 0. If you answered 6 or more, you had a 4,200, so get this stat, it's not 42, 4,200% chance to become an intravenous drug user. This has been replicated since that first study all the way up to 2012. And the questions have been varied, the cultures, they've been varied to different societies, but we have figured out that most chronic illnesses and addiction is not an exception. All link back to some form of childhood trauma. And that doesn't mean that people were... When I bring this up in crowds of families, people start cringing because they always say, I raised my families right. It's not about that. I was doing I do also live in recovery coaching things where I go in and help people get clean. Families hire me. I moved in with one of the richest families in the Midwest to help this guy get off meth. Senator Merritt just brought up meth. I run a helpline, by the way, that most of my calls right now are meth. They're no longer heroin. So, and these are people begging for help. Guess where all the funding's gone? It's gone to heroin. So now we can't get the people help with meth. So until we grasp this, we're in trouble. But my point is that we did... What was I going with that? What was my point?
You're going well.
Yeah.
What was I saying right before that?
The adverse childhood.
Well, so the adverse, what they found, it's just that it all links back to that. It all does. And we have to start educating our police forces, I'll give you an example. I was going back to that guy. I was sitting on the porch. We were sitting on the porch. I lived with him for about 30 days at this point. I couldn't figure out what it was. I always say this: the question of addiction is not why the addiction, but why the pain. Eckhart Tolle always says that all addictions begin in pain and end in pain. I was asking myself, what is it with this guy? Because he's not giving me much, right? And then all of a sudden, he's sitting out on the porch, and I've gotten a little close to him. I've connected in with him, and he looks at me and he says, "I never told anybody this, Brandon." He goes, "But my cousin so-and-so raped me from the time I was 8 years old till that time I was 12 and could do something about it." He goes, "My mom and dad don't know." So I point back to my talks with families. They freak out when I say this. We don't know what that could have been. We don't know if they were on their school every day and got terrorized. We don't know if it was just that you worked too much and weren't in the home enough to take care of them. We don't know what it is, but we have to go back and start addressing some of those root causes in our society and start making our society more trauma-centric. More, how do we, it's just in the recent years that we started doing EMDR therapy, and we started seeing therapists get into this. Back 4 years ago, I couldn't find a therapist to do EMDR therapy. That's one of the most effective forms of trauma therapy. So I believe that how we address it is we start really educating our police forces, educating our therapists, educating our mental health centers on this is what has to happen when they go through court systems or they go through legislation pieces, have to point towards let's get these people real help to get down to the causes and conditions of what's happening. And 12-step programs, which I'm a member of, they pointed to this a long time ago. They do what's called a fifth step, where you do a personal inventory and you inventory some of the things that you've done to others, and you inventory some of your past pains, and you sit down with another human being and you start talking about those past pains. And you get those out with a trusting human being. And a lot of healing takes place in those things. But it's still not enough because we need more clinicians to be involved in this process. So some of the things we're starting to see on the forefront, like with Centerstone and the outreach to overdose victims, going out to communities and saying, after overdoses happen, and saying, how can we put people around this to help you heal from whatever's happening? And I think that in school systems, we have to start, instead of disciplining kids and putting them in after school like they were people like me, like I would get in trouble and they would put me in a special class with no help, instead of putting me somewhere where I could sit with someone and without fear of being taken from my mother, put me somewhere where I could deal with whatever was going on inside the home in a non-threatening way. That we got to start putting our school systems towards that too, because that's when we'll cut the head of the snake off. We can keep band-aiding it with Narcan, which we need. I love Narcan. It's been used on me. It's been used on a lot of loved ones. With drug courts, that's important. I have a lot of friends who went through drug court and are sober to this day because of it. But we have to start plugging in these modalities of care around trauma in order to address the real issue. And children, if you think we're in trouble now, all these kids we're losing a whole generation. Did you know that for the first time, we're actually declining in life expectancy? We're declining. Our children are losing their parents. That 21, if you go up to Fishers, places like that, 22-year-olds are losing like 46, 47 friends. I'm 42. I have not lost that many friends out of their high school class. And so all those families that have, those people that have kids that are dying, those children are coming up. And right now, when we feel sorry for them and we're taking them away, we're going to end up pointing to them and saying that, judging them for their drug addiction when in actuality they were trauma victims. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Riggs. Judge Diekhoff?
I'm one of the circuit court judges in Monroe County. Before that, I was a deputy prosecutor in Monroe County for a long time. I probably should update my bio. Monroe County has 4 problem-solving courts. I have a drug court, a mental health court, a reentry court, and a veterans court. All the purposes of the problem-solving courts are to deal with the underlying issues which have brought somebody into the criminal justice system. The criminal justice system is basically the last stop for a lot of people before they die. A lot of people look at the criminal justice system as the last place before you go to prison, and that's why the criminal justice system gets such a bad rap. Typically, the criminal justice system is the last place that a lot of my addicts come before they die. Problem-solving courts are there to stop that from happening. Problem-solving courts are a model. They're enacted through the authority of the Indiana Supreme Court, and they are also enacted through the authority of the Indiana legislature. The purpose of them is to look at why somebody is in the system, and instead of addressing that crime, addressing why somebody is in the system and can't get out of the system, which almost always has to do with addiction. We have a mental health court to deal with those people who are mentally ill, and even with our mentally ill people, we find them having issues with addiction. Most of the crime in Monroe County, as is true in most places, is attributable to addiction. It is attributable to being addicted to something, needing something, stealing for something, borrowing something, using something, killing for something. It doesn't matter. I'm going to go further than Brandon has done as to what we should do about this. In all of the years that I've spent in the criminal justice system, what I think we should do about this, with all due respect to the Indiana legislature, is to start funding teachers, start funding schools, start funding daycares, start funding jobs, start funding things that will cause people to be able to survive, and to cause people to be able to be aware of what is going on and deal with it in a healthy way. The reason that the opioid crisis is getting such attention is because it is affecting people who are now being enough of a problem for people who weren't bothered by it before. Most employers are now having people come to work who are high. They used to not have to worry about that. Now they do. They have people who don't show up because they're high. Because they're taking opiates. They're getting their hands on pills, all kinds of pills. And if you can't get your hands on pills, you take...
heroin.
Yep. My veterans, if they had issues while they were still in the military and had injuries, were given medication. After a certain point in time, though, the veterans hospitals say, that's it, that's all the medication you get, but now you have an addict. So now an addict has got to go look for something else, and an addict is going to turn to heroin. We're seeing heroin making a resurgence because of that. The problem is that we keep saying we have this crisis, oh my gosh. We in the criminal justice system knew we had this crisis about 5 or 6 years ago. We saw it coming. I hate to break in on your opiate summit here, but really in Monroe County, our issue is methamphetamine. The law cannot keep up with methamphetamine. Every time they make a law about methamphetamine, they change the formula of methamphetamine. You can't change the law, so change the attitude. Methamphetamine is killing people. Do you know what it is? Oh my God. The stuff in methamphetamine is like, I can't even imagine. But what I say to my drug court people in drug court is when they don't want to trust me, they don't want to trust courage for change. They don't want to trust treatment providers. They want to trust the guy that they just handed some money to, that's handed them a packet and said, here you go. I'm like, really? And when it's laced with fentanyl and it kills you, what are you going to do about that one? The truth of the matter is, this is education. This goes way back now. This goes back to people thinking drug addicts are drug addicts. Why do we have to worry about them? Now we worry about them because now we're seeing people being affected that were not affected before. We are seeing employers affected, teachers affected, schools affected. Everybody is affected, and so now everybody's paying attention, and that's a very good thing. But we also have to look at, as Brendan so eloquently said, why? Why are we getting this? And what are we going to do about that? The truth of the matter is, it's not going to be an easy solution, I don't think. I think you've got to start funding things, investing in things that you are not going to see a result of for quite a while. And unfortunately, we're all human beings. We want to see results. You know, I contribute to Community Kitchen, and I want you to tell me that I fed 3 people today. What we're going to have to do is invest in things. I'm going to have to invest my age, Brandon's age. 42, really? Brandon's age. But we're not going to see that. We will see it eventually. But I feel bad for the legislature. People say to the legislature, do something, do something. And the legislature's like, okay. But even people want to see immediate results. You can build a prison faster than you can build a school. Because you can say to people, we have a problem, we're going to put people in prison. What does that solve? Not much. Trust me, I know. Done this for a long time. I don't like to put people in prison. It does nothing. There are some people who really, I know, this is not popular, but I'm sorry it's true. There are some people who really need to be in prison to keep the rest of us safe. That's just the truth of it. Not all, but some. Ask me sometime, I'll give you a list. But the majority of people, the legislature funds programming in the DOC. They fund programming there to help people in the DOC so that when they get out, my reentry court, I get people out of prison early, put them in a treatment program, put them in a treatment. It's highly supervised. I think Brandon would agree with me. When you supervise people, have them be responsible for things, you can help them change their lifestyle. And that's what it is. I mean, here's what I say to people. If you knew somebody who had the flu and they were coughing all over you, what would you be? You'd be like, they're coughing. I don't want the flu. You've got to say to people, this is addiction and we're going to help you, but you've got to help yourself. And we've got to have the treatment facilities to do that. We have to have the teeth to do that. We have to have the funding to do that, and it's expensive. And people blame the legislature, and they blame the criminal justice system, and they blame lots of people. The truth of the matter is, you've got to be able to get to the core elements before you can actually truly solve a problem. Problem-solving courts help. We deal with the issues. We deal with the background. We deal with the treatment. We deal with, they're 2-year programs. We try to get you to change your behavior. We have consequences. We have incentives. We look at all the research. But that's what it looks like. But unfortunately, I go into a room anymore. This is so horrible. I get into a room and I think, I wonder how many people in here are addicted to something, because it's true. And that's what we got to figure out, how we're going to solve some of the basic problems to truly do away with this crisis. Truly. Truly. And think this to yourself every now and then, will you? Cocaine used to be legal until they figured out it was a problem. Morphine was legal until they figured out it was a problem. That's where we are. We've done this before. We just have to keep learning and keep working on it.
Thank you. Thank you all very much again, seriously, for being here. I'm going to open it up to the room now. Before I open it up, you guys should have prepped some questions either in your pre-assignment or also like in your last discussion, but also think about what questions are being asked and what questions aren't being asked and what would benefit the room the most, just to keep that in mind. With that being said, Ian's going to be our mic runner, go down, thanks, and go down the aisle. If you have a question, please raise your hand.
I wanted to direct this question to Jim Merritt. Thank you so much for being here. I wanted to ask, do you think that with polarized politics becoming increasingly more partisan these days, do you find that partisan politics is getting in the way of solutions for the opioid crisis? Or do the major parties find some common ground on the issue? Is it getting in the way?
It's a very good question. In Congress and in the state legislature here in Indiana, it's a nonpartisan issue. I try to do it on most issues, if not all the issues that I work on, but there's no such thing as a Democrat addict or a Republican addict. And most, if not all the bills, in 2017, we wrote, I think we started out with 34 bills, and we ended up with 19, of which 15 passed. And I bet you less than 3 people out of 150 voted against them. And so and this year, frankly, I don't think I've ever seen anybody vote against my bills. And it's not me, it's actual people understand. They see people at the county fair, they see people out in their communities. When Eric Holcomb was running for governor, 106 days, every day someone said something to him about the opioid scourge. And so it's really not a political thing. It's a funding thing. It's also the right direction, going the right direction. And we've had to learn. And we don't have enough psychologists, social workers. We don't have enough people in the space to serve the people that are addicted. And I've been on panels with Brandy before, but one thing that I always talk about is that addiction or something like that is an illness. It's not a character flaw. And we have got to get rid of the stigma. I wrote a bill up in Fort Wayne. We were going to have sober living facilities so a judge could sentence you to a facility rather than a jail cell. And it took them, they took them 2 buildings and they're on their 3rd, and the neighborhoods rejected them the first 2. And this is to get people well. And they finally found a building on the 3rd to have folks have inpatient type of services. And so we're all in this together is my point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. We kind of talked about it in our group upstairs about how painkillers have kind of presented this idea that if you're in pain, you can always take something to, lessen that pain and make yourself comfortable. So moving forward, how do we make people who are in pain or, suffering comfortable without subjecting them to the possibility of becoming addicted to opioids or any other painkiller?
As a public health researcher, some of the things that we've seen, at least in our society, is, and I think we see this even when people start to build a resistance to antibiotics because we aren't willing to kind of work through like a virus that can't be cured by antibiotics, but we just are not willing to see what we, be okay with being sick. And I think what at least some of the studies, because part of my appointments at the School of Medicine is looking at alternatives for pain treatment, looking at, as was mentioned, and there's been a lot more attention to, instead of just someone given pain medication, is it something that can be treated with physical therapy? And when they are given pain medication just in smaller dosing instead of giving a 90-day supply of legal heroin. So I think that that's been at least some of the approaches that the medical systems have been going to, rather than, or also if it's somebody who's on hospice, delivering stuff through a pump, that's timed release rather than, again, giving someone a lot of medication all at once. So I think that's at least kind of some of the newer technologies that are happening.
Yeah. in my problem-solving court, it's a court for people who are addicted to alcohol or other substances, and there's requirements for coming in. But overall, I have addicts. The interesting thing is almost to a person, the people who come into my drug court have something physically wrong with them, except after about 4 to 6 months, no, they don't. They have learned, though, that if you have anything wrong with you, or if you have to have a tooth looked at, you need something to take for it. It just becomes part of the habit. I have some people who have chronic conditions that we work with is trying to how to regulate the medicine or do something different with it. But it's been always interesting to me. They come in and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this, I'm going to need this. And then after a while, no, they don't. It's just because that is also a lot of times part of the habit. The other thing is people who get addicted to pills because they had something that had happened to them, that has been resolved, but now they're addicted to the pills. So it's not as if you still need the pills to make your back feel better. Your back does feel better or would feel better if you quit taking the pills. So we have to figure out how to separate those two things out. I don't like to take any kind of medication at all, and a few years ago, I had kidney stones, and I never had a kidney stone before, and I was in a fair amount of pain, and I went to the doctor, and I was not really all that concerned about it, because they said, oh, well, you know, if you feel up to it, you can drink some water, and we'll see if you can just pass it yourself, but they gave me a prescription for pain medication. In the meantime, I was not concerned about this kidney stone until I picked up the pain medication. There were 100 Loratabs. My first reaction was, how long do you think this is going to take? Like, oh my, now I'm panicked. I'm like thinking, oh my gosh. Like, then I was panicked. But the truth is that the flip side of that coin is that there's a lot of people who are legitimately concerned that what the lawmakers are going to do, what law is going to do is to say, we're cutting off prescription medication. There are people who legit need that medication because they legit do. And the fear is you're going to throw out the, how was it, baby with the bathwater? Yeah, the baby with the bathwater. And so we need to be really, I think, we need to look carefully at who legit needs something and how to do it differently. In drug courts, if you go, my people love to go to the emergency room in the middle of the night. Like, they just love to do that. Like, they'll go. And so we have a rule. If you go, you have to tell us you went, we have to see the records, and you can't fill a prescription until we see it. Because we will count pills if you get them to make sure you're taking them right. Or we could get a non-narcotic alternative so that it's something that is not going to be something that's going to trigger or start your addiction. So there are those things we do and those things that I think that you can do. But Carrie is exactly right. We've been living in a society of, oh, I hurt. What can I take? Oh, gosh, I want to lose weight. What can I take? Oh, gosh, I want to run faster. What can I take? I mean, we have to change that thought process. For sure.
Yeah, I want to add to that. There was so I was fortunate I only went to jail a few times in my using days, but I went to jail. I fractured my hand before I went in, and I was addicted to opiates by this point, and I started, they regulated the Loratab that they gave me, and I thought, there's no way that's going to help me. They're only giving me one every 4 hours, but after about 3, you know, the nurse comes around, and hours later she comes, after about 3, the pain was gone, but I wasn't high. And I thought, this stuff really works whenever you take it right. It really took the pain away, and I'm not high. Wow. But I didn't care I got out of high. But it was still like a learning lesson that what they're saying is true. Another thing is I had a friend in the 12-step program who almost cut his whole, I mean, literally, this was hanging off. I was helping him. He was a carpenter. He cut it all the way to where this was hanging. I had to drive, didn't have a license. I had to drive him to the hospital, and because he lived way out in the country. He held it together all the way there. He gets there, and he's been sober about 10 plus years, and he looks, and he's laughing the whole way there, like smiling, still good spirits. Get there, and he wraps it. They unwrap it, and they put it back together, and they give him a dose of ibuprofen, and he goes, I was like, that's all you're going to get? And he was like, yeah, it doesn't hurt that bad. Like, a lot of the stuff that happens to people like me is that we create this thing in our brains that it really hurts worse than it really does. And when you go back to, like, being regulated and being shown, like, your brain starts to, like, yeah, it starts to regulate again. And you start to act like normal people, and you only need what's really needed. I got my tooth pulled. People act dramatic over teeth being pulled. I thought, based on what people were telling me, I thought I was going to die. Like she with the Vortex, oh my gosh, how long is this going to take? I was like, oh, this is going to hurt so bad. And then I got the script of ibuprofen, and it didn't hurt that bad. I literally hardly even took it, and it's fine. A lot of times we create in our minds what we want so that we can get, we all know that it's goodies. I don't care if you're addicted or not. I've had nurses when I was leaving the emergency room go, I would act stupid and be like, oh, what's this? And they'd say, well, these are goodies. Like that, and they'd smile at me, and I'd leave. This is years ago. And I'd be like, I know they're good. Like everybody knows that they feel good to take. Like they really do. Most people, they feel good to take. But the bottom line is that we can't let our minds just magnify that. That's part of the problem. So,
Carrie? Yeah, go ahead. You asked a very good question, of which we don't have the answer. And this is flummoxed everybody, because it's the human mind. It's an instant coffee, and it's a microwave generation where we expect that food to be hot right away. We expect the pain to be gone. And the federal government is telling us how little prescriptions, how small amounts you can do. Me, at the state level, we're saying you can only have it for 7 days, and everybody's getting squished, and everybody feels like they're entitled to feel no pain. And I had double hernia surgery several years ago, and the doctor prescribed 60 hydrocodone for me. I took one, made me sick, then I went to Advil and Aleve, and I was fine. I bumped into a guy a year and a half after that. He had the same surgery, same doctor. I said, well, and I have tried my hardest to educate Indiana on this, by the way. And I said, well, how many, what pain medicines you get? 60 hydrocodone, 30 days. And I said, how many did you take? He said, I took 2 for the first day, and then I stopped. And so our doctors aren't learning. They're not paying attention. But we're squeezing everybody. And I have a friend who's a pain doctor over in Crawfordsville. And most pain doctors have gone out of business because the guidelines are so tight, or a lot of people have been thrown out of business because they're feeling for their patients. They're taking care of them. And he filled out a prescription. This is absolutely fine person, pain doctor. Filled out a prescription. It was the 7 days. It was fine. And one of the retailers refused to fill it because he had been prescribing appropriately, but too many patients have gone in there that day or whatever. And then another, and I'm sorry, I'll end with this, but up in Munster, Indiana, pain doctor gets in trouble with the law, with the government, and he's out of business. And all of a sudden, there are 270 pain patients of his. They're out on the street trying to find help. And they may turn to something that we don't want them to, or they may find a pain doctor who's being squeezed. And so we don't know the answer to this. And I don't want to waste a generation of people because there are a couple guys over in Harvard in the New England School of Medicine Journal say that heroin, in 2 paragraphs, a guy by the name of Jick, say that opiates are not addictive, and that blew the whole thing up. And all of a sudden you've got pain pills throughout Ohio. Right. And if anybody really wants to know, the book Dreamland, if you really want to know about this issue, Dreamland is a pretty darn good book.
Sam Quiones, who was an LA Times reporter, wrote the book.
Outstanding piece.
I think Indiana University's in the book too, right? Indiana University is one of the pill mill, like, busting people out of here.
It's a fabulous read.
Yeah, probably.
To go to the pill mills.
I can't remember. I just know that they. But I think and I'm glad you mentioned for doctors who specialize in pain, because I think we also haven't done a very good job as. We have so many pharmaceutical advertisements in magazines, not as many on TV anymore, but there's actually a lot of innovation that's been around, such as a pain doctor that I've worked with up in Lake County really tries not to prescribe medication, but now you can get an implant that slowly releases pain medication, so that you're not required to have this, the 80 Loratab. There's a lot of different new therapies to manage pain as well that I think we just need to do a better job of educating our public on.
Thank you all, appreciate it. Let's stay right here in the yellow shirt. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Madison. I wanted to thank you all for being here today, and you all provide such beautiful and unique perspectives. And I really enjoyed just listening and talking about that. But Ms. Carrie and Ms. Mary touched on possible alternatives to opioids, and I kind of wondered what your view on the legalization of cannabis for medicinal or recreational purposes, kind of what role may that play in the future for opioid addicts?
I haven't read any of the recent research that's been published on the use of medical marijuana specifically as a treatment of addiction. Most of the literature that's out there is usually on a lot of complicated, rarer diseases. They know that they've also been using it in smaller dosing there's been some clinical trials within the Veterans Administration, and also I know epilepsy. I mean, there's a couple of really targeted studies that have been conducted, and this is research that's actually been going on for quite some time. I think it's one of those things, and here's where I, as a past health educator, and we used to do tobacco cessation, is recognizing those who also may develop an addiction to that. I am concerned with, how will we regulate that in a way to keep the public safe? But I also see some of the benefits of, yes, I've been out to Colorado and to see the dispensaries, but how is that going to play out long term? I don't think we really know, because it's not been legalized long enough.
I think on Monday, President Trump ought to write an executive order recategorizing marijuana in the way of the medical cannabis, and recategorize it and study it. And instead of states popping up here and there, because it can be, right now Michigan tried to codify medical marijuana, and I don't believe they put the fences up, the regulations high enough, and so it slipped into the recreational, and now they put it on the ballot and it's there. And I think that the state by state is just not fair, and I think we ought to study it, and I think we ought to act on it, and there are just too many benefits to cannabis. Mm-hmm. I'm glad we got there with CBD. Mm-hmm. I think, and I've changed my mind on this, because I've worked in this space for a long time now, but I do see the benefits of cannabis. But I think the federal government ought to be the overarching. Why have states if one's going to pop up, one's not, and it wouldn't pass the legislature right now. But I think we ought to see what the benefits are, because I think they're numerous.
Well, to go along with what Senator Merritt said, I think the other component that is really important to me in all of this, and I think this is coming back from the work that I did within the family courts, has been, because we're now saying that our opiate epidemic, or really addiction epidemic, is such at a high level, is really also taking a look at our, some of the sentencing guidelines, because the individuals that I work with now, or also have families in the past, once You have to go through the prison system to get access to treatment. You're now left with this felony. In fact, I've been hiring former drug users as research assistants, and it really opened my eyes when Indiana University made it very hard for me to hire someone who has lived experience because they had a felony drug conviction for possession. I think when we, especially as you talk about social justice and like, there's this end part of it. And so we need this stronger system. I'm not saying that people shouldn't be held accountable, but how long should you be held accountable where it's actually preventing you to gain employment and become a productive member of society again? So that's actually what, out of the research I have been conducting on stigma for 2 years, that is something that's glaring. Because you oftentimes have to wait, please let me know if I'm not stating this correctly, but in order to even apply for expungement, you have to, it's like from the date you are not on probation, right, 7 years after that. So depending on how long you're, after serving time, yeah, right, so knowing that you cannot get financial aid, trying to go back to school and better yourself, it's hard to get a job because your job now requires a criminal background and they see that you have a felony. So I think that to me, where I stand from the work that I continuously do, that has been the biggest tragedy when someone has come out on the other side and they're still alive. To see our employers not really embracing the magnitude of this crisis in a way that's going to give someone the second chance that I think they deserve.
The thing about it is that I'm now going to take the opposite tact. So if you liked me, you're not going to like me now. I don't think that marijuana should be legalized yet. And I'm going to tell you why. We should have learned something from tobacco. Cigarette smoking was legal. And now, most of you don't smoke cigarettes. Why? Because you don't want to get cancer and die. Why? Because we all figured out it was going to kill you. We don't know enough about marijuana, so I agree. It should be researched openly, and it should be researched. I'm not saying that it's, oh my God, the evil weed. No, I'm not. But what I'm saying is we don't know enough about it. But I will tell you this. Of my drug users, every single one of them began with marijuana. If you are an addict, it is going to start you on the path. We got to figure out what we're going to do about that. And then two, if you're not an addict, you can smoke some joints and eat some chips and you're happy. That's fine. Just stay out of a car and don't run into anybody else. But two, if you're an alcoholic, you cannot have a drink. Drinking is legal, but you start with that drink, and if you're an alcoholic and you drink until you black out, you're going to drink until you black out. It's legal, but a lot of bad things are going to happen in the meantime. So I think we need to look at it. I'm not in a rush to get it legalized at all, because we don't know enough about it. Do you want to be the generation that pushed for the legalization of marijuana, and then 50 years from now, I know you can't conceptualize this because you're all young, 50 or 60 years from now, your children are going to be going, what the heck did you legalize it for? It's killing people. And you're going to go, oh no, it was really a cool thing. I mean, come on. And the other thing about it is you're so proud of yourselves. I say this to my classes, you're so proud of yourselves. Like, we're young and we're going to get marijuana legalized. Those legislatures, with all due respect, Senator, those legislatures, they lived in the 70s where everybody was smoking marijuana. They don't think it's an evil weed either. They don't know enough about it. And we've got to be careful. The thing is that what concerns me is we're all in a rush to do something. Right. You can't solve this in a rush. And the thing is that, to put in a plug for my problem-solving courts, we try to take care of it. If you come into drug court and you successfully complete, you can plead. You have to have a felony charge. You've pled, but you're not convicted or sentenced. And after 2 years, that felony is gone. It is dismissed, so that we don't have to worry about the stigma. So we acknowledge you've done the work, you've put in the effort, you've done all these things. You don't have that felony conviction, and that's why they exist. In my reentry court, I bring people from prison early, we put them through the same system. We either try to reduce that felony for them, Or we try to do other things to help them now keep going and get on with their lives, because that should happen. And that's one, to me, it's a huge, huge benefit of problem-solving courts. Of all the years that I've done this, it's the most really, really positive thing that really gets me really enthused and passionate about helping people, because it really does. But my class always says, don't you think it should be legalized? No. I think we need to learn about it first, and then maybe yes, but maybe no. I don't know. But I will tell you, Indiana is taking a more relaxed view, which is a really odd thing to say if you're talking about marijuana, a really relaxed view about marijuana and what it is. It's now a B misdemeanor to possess small amounts, looking at different things. But I will tell you something interesting, and I'm just putting this out there because I don't know the answer either. In the last year, in my system, is seeing a lot more dealing marijuana, and I don't know why. We haven't seen dealing marijuana for a long time, and we are seeing lots of dealing marijuana, and we are talking high quantities of marijuana. I don't know why. I really don't. I don't know why.
I want to point something out. It's not just jobs. I do sober housing, and I'm telling you, one of the things that changed my perspective, I used to be, because I got off the ground and I built my own life back. So I had that attitude when people would move in, like, go get a job, stop, that was kind of the beginning how I had an attitude, and I started seeing people with felonies get out of prison with just the shoes and the prison clothes on their back, come to my housing, and then I would have people on Facebook literally clothe them, drop off clothes to the house for the person, I tell them what size, and then we would clothe them, and then a person that had spent 20 years accumulative over the years of their life in prison, not be able to get a job, not be able to get housing, food stamps, nothing. They can't get fed. So now they're in my housing where I can't pay rent because I don't own the houses, and it's like this mess that's just it's next to impossible for them to get out of. If it wasn't for the courts, people like that, like actually helping assist with some of that, we would have been like, I felt hopeless trying to help them. And it was like, I can imagine how they felt. Now, couple of cases. One, he worked at a sandwich restaurant, delivering sandwiches, and then now he's making like $30,000 an hour at a sales job. So he was able to get housed, able to start that little minimal job. We were able to reduce some of his rent because of some other funding we got through different means. And then, so we need more programming like that too, we can help them move up the ladder. So no one up here is making anything up. These are challenges that are next to impossible. But I always go back to what I opened up with. Until we go back to why this is happening in the first place in our society, these are all Band-Aids. That's just what I always point to.
And I think even just building off what you said in the beginning, Brandon, because of the work and some research I've done in child welfare, I mean, our Department of Child Services is a mess right now. It's always been kind of a mess. It got better, and then it got into really just a mess. Because I actually did some work on practice reform back before I started my PhD, and even in the work I did with kids, a lot of the work I did when I was working with DCS was kids aging out of the foster care system, or they were aging out of the juvenile justice system, and that transition from where probably most of you are now, like 18 to 24. What we know from the research, and this goes back to like experiencing trauma and the adverse childhood experiences, that there is a window of opportunity in their adolescence to do some prevention so that you can stop the cycle where I'm sure you've seen multi-generational families, like grandparents, parents, and kids, everyone's addicted. If you have an adolescent from like about 15 to 25 connected to at least one caring adult, meaning that they feel connected, and this is someone in their life, like big brothers, big sisters, but it also can be a really good neighbor or another family member. Because when I worked around the family courts, like the further you got out of the tree, there were some really great family members who were willing to step up, so a child wouldn't have to be in foster care. And this was a Stanford study that was done that said if you're connected by 25, you're 54% less, which isn't a lot, but to me it's enough, less likely to basically engage in the behaviors that got you involved in the system, that your parents got in the criminal justice system. So having even those prevention programs by having mentors and having basically the community take some responsibility too to step up, as what Brandon's facilitating by just getting basic needs taken care of.
Thank you. Okay, can I get another question?
So my question is, does the pharmaceutical industry, they manufacture and sometimes advertise these drugs, as you mentioned, Dr. Lawrence, earlier, do they have any responsibility maybe ethically, because they do manufacture these drugs to the people that use them and potentially abuse them?
Okay. Okay. Maybe you turn it on. Thanks. Sorry. Yes, but I want Senator Merritt, because I think the most important thing that's been happening is that states now have the ability to sue the pharmaceutical company, companies that kind of help facilitate the prescription drug use. And I want to really delineate that, but I think he can speak more to that, what Indiana has done.
Well, it's a good question. It is in the courts now. And it probably will end up looking a lot like the tobacco settlement, if you will. But when you look at it, if you really look deep into it, the name Purdue Pharma comes, and
not affiliated with the university.
Yeah, but Purdue Frederick, and there could be some culpability there. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer, and the courts, that's why they're there. But I think we're all in this together. I think it's important for Purdue and all the rest of the pill companies, if you will, to come forward. For instance, Purdue Frederick has been trying for the last couple of years, and to some success, having a tamper-resistant pill for pain, where if it smashed, it turned into gel. It's not like if you smashed the regular pill that you could snort it or some other way. And so this is a very difficult situation. I think we all have to have a conscience about it. Last time I checked, when I looked at Purdue Pharma and the drugs that they prescribed and they're being chased around about right now, it's a very small percentage of what's going on, but it's a very powerful drug. And so it's a very difficult situation. I'm kind of curious to see what everybody else has to say.
So the thing that bothers me about the pharmaceutical industry is that they always seem to come up with these little tactics like the tamper-resistant, like Opanas were originally created to be that. Drug addicts will always find a way to break that down, cook it in an oven, throw it in the microwave, throw some chemicals in it, and break it down and learn how to shoot it. It's just the way things. If any of you have never been to jail, you walk in that jail and they can cook coffee. They make Monopoly games out of toilet paper that look better than your Monopoly games. They have, these are creative people, and so I have watched people break, every year they come out with a tamper-resistant pill, and they claim it won't be able to be used. You can look back on history. Opana was one of them. Opana is one of the things responsible for Scott County. Right. It is
expired Opana.
Expired Opana, and they ended up but they still break those down.
Yeah.
I know people with full prescriptions that break Opanas down every day. It's not. So my problem with Purdue Pharma and all that is they always get sued for billions of dollars and they always lose, but then somehow yet they come fighting back. And then a few years ago, if you remember, they ended up passing all the way back to 12 years old. Now they can start prescribing high-powered opiates. Now I agree, if someone's in hospice and dying, they probably need to die in comfort. But if a 12-year-old isn't in a dying state, I would just be really careful in giving them a high-powered drug like that. They're not going to shoot it up, no, but they just get away with whatever they want to get away with. And it's ridiculous. That's just always been my experience and what I've watched unfold.
Sorry, I thought maybe you want to go in.
I would also say is like, what are we doing to incentivize the innovation of these technologies? Because how can we move away from the use of opiates for pain? Because it seems like there's been a lot of investment for, like, again, that quick fix, but we haven't really seen a lot of investment in developing the science to create some alternatives, or at least we're not hearing about it as much. And so I think that's where, like, back to, you know, what would a policy intervention look like, or what would some regulations look like, and so that we're, you know, where we have them similar to what has happened with the big tobacco, not only holding them accountable, but as you see, like, closer and closer, even here at a state level, some of the work that's being done, because we know tobacco is, like, incredibly harmful. We know the science is there, and we unfortunately it's still easy to access, and nicotine is an incredible addiction. So I think that those are some questions, especially for your generation, that we're going to be dealing with the ripple effects from both of these drugs.
Thank you. Other questions? This side.
Hi, thank you guys for being here today. I wanted to ask you what you think should be done for people who need help but don't want to, like, seek it out or don't want it.
I can tell you these, I know Brandon's been part of this as well, is I'm a big advocate for harm reduction. Syringe access programs, definitely big, much, like, I really had my slogan for Narcan and naloxone, thanks to Senator Merritt, has been, don't leave home without it. Because I've seen some amazing transformations here in Bloomington with the Indiana Recovery Alliance, witnessed, like, people working with Brandon and others to get access and really having someone, when you feel like you've been disenfranchised not only from your family but your community, having someone who's there to walk you through and not leave you behind has been pretty powerful, and I've seen some of those opportunities and heard about some of the stories from people who had that go in getting clean needles to prevent disease, but come out as a participant, enter recovery, now volunteer. I've seen some pretty amazing transformation, so I think that's something for me that has become part of the work that I do, and is not something that I would have imagined where I was given the background I had, but I definitely I think it's become it's part of our narrative because it's where we are, and it offers that kind of, when someone's kind of in that state of trying to decide what to do next or trying to get help, and because of the stigma and shame that's still associated with substance misuse, I think it's been a good buffer.
Another question? Over here.
Hello, thank you for being here. My question was actually about the role of physicians in contributing to the opioid crisis, and maybe as well the role of the shortage of primary care providers in rural areas. So if you could comment on that.
I was reading an interesting stat, because doctors get the brunt of, like, a lot of times the brunt of this, but I was reading an interesting stat that since 2011 the opioid prescriptions have went way down, and we've seen more synthetic. Most of the deaths are now coming from fentanyl and coming from like synthetics, and they're kind of China and Mexico have a role in that. So doctors, I believe, have gotten better from what I see, but it's still rural towns. I don't know about the rural towns, like those little towns off in, Jennings County is where I do a lot of my work. Jennings County is right, like, not that far from Scott County. It's a community that was on CNN too, because if you guys remember 3 or 4 years ago when they had those massive amounts of overdoses, they ran out of Narcan. Like, in those areas, those doctors were handing out like candy still, and so the thing that we did to mitigate that, and it goes back to what Carrie said, the thing I like about harm reduction is with cancer, if someone keeps relapsing back into cancer, you wouldn't say, I'm not going to keep you comfortable and mitigate the harm that the cancer is causing. That's kind of the concept of that, but still in Scott County, we were flooding it with Narcan, and we started preventing the overdoses from happening, pushing Narcan as hard as we could down there. And now they have sober living, they have all kinds of things down there. Now one of the Seymours actually asking them for help and how they did. And so it's kind of like, to me, doctors nationwide are getting the blame, but it's what we've been talking about up here today. It's no one, not the pharmaceutical companies, not the doc, it's all of us, are all hands on deck. We're all in this together. We have to teach the doctors, be educated on the pharmaceutical industry, and we have to get housing going and fund people through the court system to be able to get on their feet and stuff like that, and quit beating up on each other. The doctors are doing the best they could. Listen, doctors were told, here's the pain scale, and if they're up here, this is what you have to do.
Or you won't get reimbursed.
Or you won't get reimbursed. So they're doing what they were told to do back then. And are there some candy doctors? Oh yeah, I remember Tawari and all these doctors out there that I know so many people who died from those doctors. They were called candy doctors. And my mother-in-law, my mother, all those women were getting dope off all of them. And it was as easy as walking in, flirting with him a little bit, and getting a prescription written. And those doctors will always exist. And when we get them, what we can do about it is we can arrest them and put them in prison for dealing drugs, instead of really being doctors and treating pain. But doctors, I hope that they stop getting such blame and we start bringing them in on the phone and start educating them. They only get like 3 hours or something like that in med school on addiction. It's crazy. Like, they should get way more than that education on addiction. They're traumaphobic too. We should teach them more about trauma.
Yeah. Traumaphobic, new word. In the Commonwealth of Maryland, they have what is called MAT training. And everyone who is a physician is welcome to take 8 hours over the internet or in person, and it's free. And in that year, 2017, and Parker, you probably remember this, when we had countless bills, I had a piece of legislation that allowed Indiana, for all physicians, for 8 hours to really understand MAT and opioids and just understand the scourge itself. But then the money was just incredible, the fiscal impact of it all. So we shortened it down to just those individuals who take care of women, of pregnant moms, and the people in that realm, because we saw an incredible increase in pregnant addicts and NAS babies. And so whenever I look at a piece of legislation and it's cost too much money and I have to bring it back down, I always bring it back to what I've always enjoyed in the legislature, is working on legislation that deals with children or babies. And so we brought it back down there, and the bill didn't pass. I introduced it again, along with a legislation this year that incentivized people to go into the addiction space, to become a counselor, and the way we do that is we forgive tuition. And it's just one of those things, we need people in the medical space to actually understand addiction.
Another question? Green shirt here.
I had a question for Brandon Drake. You previously mentioned about the traumaphobic society that we live in today, and how most chronic illnesses are linked to childhood trauma. I kind of just wanted to know how you use that trauma in recovery for people who are addicted to things.
Let me tell you, I'll tell you an interesting story. I had this dad calling me for a couple of weeks and kept begging me to work with his daughter, right? I kept telling him I don't work with females, I don't do, because there's certain rules I have. I get them to a female so that they can get help from a female, and I was explaining this to him. But I helped another family that he knew, and he was begging me because no one had ever been able to help this girl. So I finally decided to meet with her. Well, I did EMDR therapy myself on childhood trauma. I'm never quiet about this, but I was raped multiple times by men growing up. I lived in a drug-infested environment, beat my skull was fractured by the time I was 3. So by the time I was in my 20s, I had no idea why I was using drugs. I just knew it felt good. And then later on in life, it almost destroyed me. proper help. It's called EMDR therapy. There's other forms of therapy that address trauma. While I'm explaining this to her, that in this book, I finally meet with this girl and I'm explaining to her that what happens in a traumatic situation as a child, especially extreme trauma, is your brain has disassociative moments, right? Where when it's happening, the brain actually does something to protect itself. It disassociates. And if you go back and do studies and MRIs on people that are talking about these instances, you actually see the gray matter go across their brain. It's all science, right? And I was telling her this, and all of a sudden her dad knew that something had happened in college years ago. She was a soccer player, but one day her friend called and said she wouldn't get out of bed for a week. And so they brought her home from college, and she would never talk about what happened. Well, when I was telling her the story about trauma and talking about my own, she started just crying, bawling. And I'll try not to cry up here, but she started crying. And she said, when I was talking about the gray matter and how the brain disassociates, and the trauma with trauma victims isn't the trauma that happens, it's the abandonment that child feels by society, and they feel like they're not safe and protected, and that's why the brain disassociates. And I was telling her this, and she started crying, and she said, on my third OWI, she said, a friend of mine called me and said, do you not remember the day that I went to your dorm, and we went on a jog, and you started bleeding everywhere, and I was like, I took you back to your dorm to get cleaned up, and you told me you didn't know what happened the night before. And it all started coming back to her. She was raped that night. She did cocaine with some guys. They gang raped her, but her brain shut down and she didn't remember the event. But her friend telling her that story brought it all back, and she just started breaking. So what I did with her was I took her to a therapist that I knew that does the EMDR therapy, and now she's on the journey to start addressing that. Hopefully, coupled with some other 12-step models or whatever, she'll be able to get better. But that's what I mean by we have to start setting up these models for people. These different models within the courts, within schools, to get them to a place where they can. But what I mean by traumaphobia is because it's instances like that we don't want to, it's not just instances like that cause it. There's neglect, there's bullying, there's all kinds of things that happen as a young adult. There's also, if you go to the Crawford House, right, I do volunteer work down there, there's not one woman that hasn't had some kind of sexual trauma. There's not one guy, I've never, even most of the guys, I've never talked to any of them. And if that's the case, then why aren't we flooding them with trauma resources? Therapists that can practice it. One of the reasons what Merritt is saying, we don't have enough. We don't have, I always say this too, and I wanted to open with this, but I didn't. We're not in an opioid crisis. We're in a treatment crisis. We're in a lack of behavioral health technician crisis. We're in a lack of enough judges to handle all these courts. You can handle them all, one judge. We're in a big crisis all the way around because our system was not created to handle that girl or any other person that had that. Not enough of it. So.
We're going to take one more question. Right here.
Thank you all again for coming out on Saturday afternoon. As a firefighter EMT, I'm asking this question on behalf of the first responder community. Do you believe that there is enough training available for the public on proper use and effects of naloxone now that it's available over the counter?
I can help with this. I'm glad you're an EMT first responder because I just surveyed over 600 first responders in the state of Indiana looking at the incidence of accidental needle sticks if they come upon a needle, as well as stuff around Narcan naloxone. The response is that they do feel comfortable. It's with administering naloxone, and it should be more publicly available because oftentimes, especially the small rural counties where it's a subcontractor of a bigger maybe organization, they're not affiliated with the hospital. They like to see it more out into the community because that would help. If the public knows more about how to administer naloxone and feels comfortable with it and it's very accessible, then it will help if it takes some time to get to the person who's in need. It buys time. But I think overall, and we had volunteers and paid first responders from law enforcement to paramedics to fire departments as well. And across the board, that seemed to be, they felt pretty well equipped. and we're comfortable. They think it just needs to be continuously pushed out and more opportunities available more publicly.
You know, I think, just to expand on your question a little bit, right now in Indianapolis, the Indianapolis I saw the guy that runs the Indianapolis Motor Speedway this morning. That's why I was thinking. Our law enforcement, IMPD, right now are social workers with a gun. And in our future, our government needs to look more like behavioral health and law enforcement. And this, we need a more concentration on understanding how people are operating and if they're operating. And EMTs and people that are heroes, or first responders, are just invaluable in this space. And maybe you mentioned this, the syringe. I introduced legislation this year that will surprise some of you, but most of you understand that it's against the law for you to have a needle on you. It's against the law. But we have needle exchanges in various counties around the state. So it's kind of contrary. It kind of collides. And so I have legislation this year that says that if you get stopped by a police officer, or if you're awake and an EMT comes, you can tell them that you have a needle on you and have immunity. And we need that sort of approach to keep our first responders out of trouble. And as well as there's got to be just some sort of feeling that another way of getting help to somebody, and people know that. But EMTs are right there, and you know, I know a lot, and many of them say that they've been to resuscitate somebody twice in a day. And it takes 7 overdoses for somebody to actually think or feel the idea of getting clean. So that's, I think, we all work on a daily basis.
I definitely want to give props to Senator Merritt, because he has been, I think, one of Indiana's most strongest legislative champions when it comes to addressing the crisis that we're in right now, and that we're probably going to be in for a long time, and has really been very thoughtful. I mean, he's the reason why we have such great access to Narcan and naloxone now, and the fact that he's really pragmatic and seeing, like, looking at all the barriers as they come, because one thing in the realm of harm reduction here in Indiana is that we did have one of, and it's not, the HIV outbreak is managed, but you now have 231 individuals in a town of 4,200 within the state of Ryan White, who really was also a tragic victim of HIV in this country. Living with HIV in a time and space in which we can actually, the narrative has been getting to zero, because we have pre-exposure prophylaxis, we have post-exposure prophylaxis, and harm reduction in between, whether it's, you know, the use of condoms and now clean needles. Like, so having that outbreak could have been completely avoided if we had the ability to see some of the things that Brandon has talked about, because people are often, who use drugs, are in this, a lot of the shadows. And the more rural county that you're in, the less resources you have available. So I think that we would not be where, I mean, we have a lot of ways to go, and I'm hoping with this legislation it will maybe move the needle as far as getting counties to have more harm reduction programs. I mean, Kentucky instituted their law right after us, and they have 50 operating syringe services programs in the state, and have been doing some pretty amazing things. So we have 7, and there's always, it's been even hard to keep that going. So hopefully, knowing that this is kind of it literally is harm reduction. It's not, it's kind of that middle space between, and sometimes often, an opportunity to get to a place to find help through a variety of services. So.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to take the last 5 minutes. Just wondering if you could do like one final comment from today. We're about to, just for context, we're about to go to a session where we're supposed to do action steps and like thinking of like what can we do, either local, state, or federal level. If you want to like address that, or just any final comments.
Yeah.
What was the frame?
So our next session, we're going to go into about an hour of discussion in our little groups about what we can do going forward. So action steps, either that personal, local, state, federal. What are we going to
Well, I think the judge, when she talked about education, it was spot on. And when we get calls all the time with people who don't have insurance, they're hooked, they want to withdraw, they want to get to freedom, they want to get to the gateway of freedom and away from drugs. And like I said, it takes sometimes people 7 times to overdose, and it's a really interesting point of being in the middle of all this in my stead, because in my office we've helped countless people, and these could be someone in District 31, more likely not, and it's really disappointing when someone needs help and I can't give it to them because the service isn't there. And we need to continue to create the services that are necessary. And along with almost every speech I give, and I give probably 4 a month on this topic, I use the phrase, it's an illness, not a character flaw. And that gets to the stigma part of it. But you would not believe how many people have come to me and they've lost a loved one, they've lost a friend, they've lost a relative, they've lost somebody. And they don't want someone else to go through that. And that's a really difficult point in their lives, and they're asking for help. And what I say to them is, you need to use your grief for good. And all the energy that you have, you got to use that so somebody else doesn't suffer the same fate. And it's about the best I got of advice. But there have been plenty of deaths in the state. And I'm sure everybody in this room knows someone that has been struggling with this. And my advice to you is actually to understand that these people, the folks that are suffering from addiction, are good people. They made a mistake, one mistake, and you're in the vat. And understanding and listening is at the core of this. But encouraging a friend or a relative to get help and trying to find that help for them is what my advice is.
Thank you, Dr. Lawrence.
Going off of what Senator Merritt said, I think definitely how I learned very early on how you see someone is how you are with them. So if you see someone as a felon who is a junkie, and that's where it stops, or you see that slut over there, she's high all the time. I think then that's the way we think about things. I think that's how they don't deserve the help, they don't deserve empathy, they don't deserve to have a second chance. I think that's where we have to be really recognizing that this is such, as Senator Merritt, not a character flaw, but it's a brain disease. When it comes down to it, when it comes down to trauma, how that affects our brain, and then we attempt to self-medicate because we don't know where to get help or how to get help. We're afraid to get help because of what someone may find out about a secret that I'm not ready to share with you yet. I think that's where, especially for your generation, because this is going to be a ripple effect, we're going to be dealing with the consequences for a really long time, and until we start to think about these things differently and recognize that we don't have a perfect solution or a pill for it, we need to really be funding, and really start taking care of our community, however you define that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go back and say that you know, I'm gonna go back to trauma. I'm sorry, but if I were to stab you with a knife right now, or I were emotionally rejected, the same parts of the brain light up. And whether I stab you with a knife or emotionally rejected, painkillers, opiates, cocaine, all the synthetics that we're seeing, they're all a form of painkillers. Some of them specifically painkillers. So what we're seeing is a society that's treating itself for pain of living in whatever situation they're growing up in, and that's all sectors, all nationalities, all cultures. It's the same. So the challenge to your generation, or even mine still, is how do we start, because Carrie mentioned, Dr. Kari Lawrence mentioned resiliency. How do we start putting people around children now to start mentoring them and start being that positive influence in their life? She mentioned big brothers and big sisters. I didn't have an adult to take me to sign up for that. So, you know what mine was and why I'm sitting here today was the Banneker Center. It was the Westside Community Center on West 7th Street, where it was open until 11 o'clock at night back then. Larry Winters is a teacher now, and all these people used to let us come there and stay there and be safe there. Those guys are the ones that were for me. But now that's even been taken over by Parks and Rec. It's closed at a certain time now. We need community-oriented solutions to where we put it in the middle of all neighborhoods, to where children have a safe place to go, that they can be mentored and be nourished, like Boys and Girls Club, places like that. But keep in mind that people on the lowest end of the spectrum in poverty might not have anyone to pay for those things. So how do we get them to those programs too? And transportation, things like that. That's why I was like simply located on West 7th, where I grew up in that area. We could walk up the street and go in there. So mine is like the brain. Like we have to go back to the brain, the spirit, the mind, body, and spirit. We have to start treating it all levels of that by using the courts, by using legislation, by using and one of the solutions too is all hands on deck. We all got to do this together. We all might not agree, but we've got to put the solutions on the table and work towards getting better, because what we're doing is not working. That's all.
Thank you.
I want to thank all of you for being here today. It's a Saturday afternoon, and for whatever reason that you're here, I think it's very encouraging and very hopeful. You are the generation who will start to change this, and you are the generation who cares. There are days I have to tell you when I come home from sitting in report all day, especially when I've been dealing with a lot of different situations and a lot of different injured people, that I think, I don't know. And then I teach a class, or then I come to this, and I see that you are the ones who care. I don't know. I don't have the answers. I will tell you this. I think that one of the things that we will do to change a lot of things is to look around, look at who's sitting next to you, look around who's on campus with you, and say to yourself, they are just like me. Whatever color they are, whatever religion they are, whatever sexual orientation they are. I say to people all the time, the day that I forget that the law is made up of people is the day I'm going to quit. People write laws, people enforce laws, people impose laws, people follow laws, people break laws, but it's all about people. We are all the same. Everybody you meet has an issue. I don't know what it is, but they do. And the thing is, too, why don't people tell people they've been sexually assaulted? Why don't people tell people they've been hurt? Why don't people tell people that they have been somehow injured? Ask yourselves that and start dealing with that. Once we can trust each other enough to tell people that, to not be judged, to not be hurt, to not be insulted, but to be cared for, then a lot of this stuff, we will be able to move forward on. Until you figure out why somebody needs a pill, you're still always going to need a pill. So why don't people tell people they've been hurt, or they need somebody, or to ask for that help? That's where I think we should go. And when I'm in a room full of people who have given up their Saturday afternoon to be here to listen to us, I'm very hopeful that that's what's going to happen. So thank you all very much again for having us and for being here, because you're the ones who are important.
Thank you.